For over 3,000 years, this object said nothing. No scholar could read it, no linguist could crack it. Entire lives were spent staring at its symbols, trying to force meaning out of silence. Empires rose and fell around this language. The people who spoke it vanished. The sounds of their voices disappeared completely. All that remained were these marks, scratched into clay, carved into stone, painted onto crumbling walls, a message with no key. Then, in a lab far from any desert or ruin, a machine started listening. And what it heard changed everything we thought we knew about how history gets written and who gets to write it. This is the story of how artificial intelligence cracked a code that defeated humanity for 3 millennia. Let's start with the obvious question. Why is it so hard to read an old language in the first place? You'd think it would be simple. Symbols represent sounds. Sounds form words. Words form sentences. Just match the symbols to the sounds, right? Wrong. Completely wrong. Here's the problem. When a language dies, when the last person who spoke it takes their final breath, it doesn't just disappear from conversation. It disappears from context. There's no dictionary, no grammar textbook, no native speaker to ask, what does this mean? There's just the writing floating alone in time, disconnected from the world that gave it meaning. Now imagine trying to decode a message when you don't know the alphabet, don't know the grammar, don't know the vocabulary, and don't even know for certain what family of languages it belongs to. That's not translation. That's closer to breaking a military cipher, except the cipher was never meant to be secret. It was just forgotten. Historians call these undeciphered scripts, and there are more of them than you'd expect. The Indus Valley script, used across what is now Pakistan and northwest India, remains a mystery after more than 4,000 excavated inscriptions and over 100 attempted decipherments. Linear A, the writing system of the Minoan civilization on Bronze Age Crete, has resisted every effort for over a century. Proto-Elamite, one of the oldest writing systems on Earth, sat unread for thousands of years, hiding what might be humanity's earliest bureaucratic records, tax receipts, inventories, and administrative notes from a civilization that predates most of what we consider ancient history. These aren't obscure curiosities. These are entire civilizations whose voices have been muted by time. Every law they wrote, every poem, every prayer, every insult scratched onto a tavern wall, locked away behind a wall of symbols nobody can read. For decades, cracking these scripts was purely a human endeavor. Brilliant, obsessive scholars spent entire careers on a single symbol set, searching for patterns, comparing scripts to known languages, hunting for a Rosetta Stone, a bilingual text that could bridge the unknown language to a known one. Sometimes it worked. Egyptian hieroglyphs fell in the 1820s, once the actual Rosetta Stone gave scholars a Greek translation to compare against. Linear B, the script of Mycenaean Greece, was cracked in 1953 by an architect named Michael Ventris, who wasn't even a professional linguist. He treated it like a puzzle, and he solved it. But most ancient scripts never got that lucky break. No bilingual text, no shortcut, just silence, until artificial intelligence entered the picture. Here's what makes this moment different from every previous attempt at decipherment in human history. AI doesn't get tired. It doesn't get frustrated. It doesn't need 40 years to notice a pattern buried across 13,000 fragments. It can look at all of them at once. Researchers working with massive text databases, collections of tablets, inscriptions, and fragments scattered across museums on different continents began feeding these texts into machine learning systems. Not to translate them directly, at least not at first, but to do something more fundamental, find the patterns humans were missing. Think about what a human researcher can realistically hold in their head. A career's worth of study might mean intimate familiarity with a few thousand inscriptions, but an AI model can process tens of thousands of fragments simultaneously, mapping which symbols appear next to which other symbols, which sequences repeat, which combinations show up in what contexts. It can notice that a certain symbol always appears near numbers, suggesting it might represent a unit of measurement. It can notice that another symbol cluster only shows up at the beginning of texts, suggesting a formal opening phrase, something like a greeting or a header. This is pattern recognition on a scale no human brain can match. And patterns are the raw material of decipherment. One of the most important breakthroughs came from an approach that didn't even require the AI to know what the ancient language actually meant, at least not initially. Instead, the system treated the unknown script as if it were an unsolved code, mapping its internal structure, its statistical fingerprint, and comparing that fingerprint against the fingerprints of known languages. Researchers built a self-learning algorithm that could take symbols from an unknown language and, without prior knowledge of what family it belonged to, start identifying probable relationships to symbols in known related languages. It looked for patterns of sound change, the small, predictable ways that words shift and evolve as languages drift apart from a common ancestor over centuries, just like Latin drifted into Spanish, Italian, Oh, and French, ancient language families split and morphed in structured, mathematically traceable ways. The AI didn't need a Rosetta Stone. It built its own bridge, symbol by symbol, using probability instead of intuition. And then there was a completely different kind of AI breakthrough, one that didn't focus on meaning at all, but on the physical act of reading. Some ancient writing isn't hard to decode because the language itself is mysterious. It's hard to decode because the writing is destroyed. Clay tablets get cracked. Cuneiform gets worn smooth by thousands of years of sand and shifting earth. Scrolls get carbonized by volcanic eruptions, curled into blackened, unreadable lumps that would disintegrate if anyone tried to physically unroll them. Manuscripts fade, flake, and rot. This is where a different flavor of AI stepped in: computer vision. Trained on thousands of examples of damaged and legible text side by side, these systems learned to do something remarkable: reconstruct what a symbol probably looked like before it was worn away, based on the faint traces that remained and the statistical likelihood of what usually appears in that position. It's the digital equivalent of an art restorer filling in a missing corner of a painting, except done at a scale and precision that would take a human restorer a lifetime to replicate across an entire archive. For carbonized scrolls, too fragile to physically open, researchers used X-ray scanning to create detailed 3D digital models of the rolled-up material, then trained AI to detect the subtle differences in texture that indicated ink on the page, even though the scroll was never unrolled and the ink itself was chemically almost identical to the burnt papyrus surrounding it. The AI learned to see ink that the human eye literally could not perceive. This mattered because the amount of ancient writing sitting unread in museum basements is staggering. Major collections hold tens of thousands of tablets and fragments that have never been transcribed, translated, or even properly cataloged, simply because there aren't enough trained human experts alive to do the work. Some experts have pointed out that only a small number of people in the entire world can fluently read certain ancient scripts. A handful of specialists guarding knowledge that could unlock the memory of an entire civilization, simply because there is too much material and too few trained eyes. AI changed that math completely. A system that can be trained once and then applied to tens of thousands of documents in a fraction of the time doesn't just speed up the process, it makes previously impossible projects suddenly achievable. So what actually happens when a 3,000-year silence finally breaks? It's rarely a single dramatic sentence, like an ancient prophecy revealing itself in perfect poetic form. It's usually smaller, stranger, and somehow more human than that. Deciphered administrative tablets have revealed something almost mundane: tax records, inventories of livestock, receipts for grain shipments, complaints about a merchant who never delivered goods that were paid for. It's easy to imagine these are unimportant compared to grand poetry or royal proclamations, but they're actually priceless in a completely different way. They tell us how ordinary people actually lived, what they worried about, what they valued, what made them angry enough to write it down and keep the receipt. Other newly readable texts have shown legal disputes between neighbors, letters between family members separated by long journeys, and religious hymns dedicated to gods whose names had been lost to history until the moment the text was finally read. Every one of these fragments is a voice, a specific person, thousands of years dead, saying something they wanted remembered. And for thousands of years, nobody could hear them. Now, thanks to AI-assisted decipherment, some of them finally can be heard. This isn't just an academic curiosity. It reshapes our understanding of history at a foundational level. Historical narratives are built from the texts we can read. When entire civilizations only exist to us through the eyes of their neighbors and enemies, the ones who happen to write in a language we already understood, we get an incomplete, sometimes deeply biased picture. Every newly decoded script has the potential to correct that record, to let a silenced civilization finally speak in its own words about its own life, on its own terms. It would be misleading to suggest every ancient mystery has now been solved. It hasn't. The Indus script remains formally undeciphered, despite more than a century of attempts and the application of increasingly sophisticated computational tools. Part of the challenge is structural. The surviving AI inscriptions are extremely short, often just a handful of symbols, which gives even the most powerful pattern recognition system very little material to work with. It's the difference between reconstructing a language from an entire library versus reconstructing it from a stack of grocery lists. Linear A remains stubbornly unread as well. Researchers have identified some numerical symbols and a few probable proper names, but the underlying language beneath the script is still a mystery. It doesn't cleanly match any known language family, which makes the statistical bridge building approach far harder to apply. And this is actually one of the most important things to understand about AI's role in this entire story. It is not magic. It is not an instant answer machine. What AI actually does is act as an extraordinarily powerful research partner, one that can process scale and complexity that would take human scholars' entire careers. surfacing patterns, candidates, and probabilities that human experts then have to verify, argue over, test, and confirm. The final judgment, the actual moment of certainty when a decipherment is accepted as correct, still comes down to human expertise. Historians, linguists, and archaeologists cross-reference AI suggested translations against archaeological context, comparative linguistics, and historical plausibility. AI proposes, humans confirm. This partnership, not a simple story of a machine solving what people couldn't, is really what's driving this new golden age of decipherment. We're living through a strange and remarkable moment. For the first time in human history, we have tools capable of reading humanity's own earliest words back to us, at a scale and speed that was completely unimaginable even 20 years ago. Every civilization that ever existed wanted to be remembered. That's arguably one of the most universal human instincts there is, the desire to leave a mark, to say I was here, I mattered, remember me. The scribes who pressed reeds into wet clay 4,000 years ago, the priests who painted symbols onto temple walls, the merchants who scratched receipts into stone, none of them could have imagined that their words would sit in silence for millennia, and then suddenly, impossibly, be read again by strangers using tools built from something like electricity and mathematics. There is something almost emotional about that, a message in a bottle thrown across 3,000 years of ocean, finally reaching shore. And this is only the beginning. As these AI systems get more capable, as more archives get digitized and fed into these models, as computer vision gets better at reconstructing damaged and worn text, we're likely to see more of these silences break. More. Civilizations will get their voices back. More of the human story will come into focus. We are, quite literally, teaching machines to resurrect the dead, not the people, but their words, their complaints, their prayers, their receipts, their jokes, their arguments, their love letters. The past is not as silent as we once believed. It was just waiting for someone, or something, capable of finally listening closely enough. 3,000 years of silence, broken not by a genius scholar alone in a library, but by a machine trained to notice what human eyes had missed for 100 lifetimes. The ancient world is speaking again, and we are only just beginning to listen.